What's up, everybody? Lefty here with Party Science Podcast. I am here with someone that I have been introduced to through Juan Carlos. He spoke highly of him when I asked Juan Carlos, hey, do you have anybody who you think would make for a great conversation on my podcast? This was the first name on the list that he sent me. So it's a pleasure to sit here with Joe Hungler. Pleasure, man. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for having me, Lawrence.
Of course. Anybody Juan Carlos refers to me, I know they're going to be someone who loves people, gives back to the community, and is very just about, they've been doing what they've been doing for years, so they're very experienced in it. So to jump kind of into it with you, I read online 30 years of doing youth work, 15 plus years of being here, and then you went to school for mathematics. So how did you go from mathematics to youth work? Like how
Uh,
did that all develop for you?
yeah, so I was a very shy kid up in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I would go down to back then it was the boys' club, um, and started playing basketball, and I ended up working at their summer camp and on college breaks and those kind of things, and it became the Boys and Girls Club. While I was there, it had like three different names. It was the Boys Club, then it was the Girls and Boys Club, then it was the Boys and Girls Club. Um, And actually, there was one more change where they flipped Manchester from the front to the back.
Okay.
It was like Manchester Boys and Girls Club, then Boys and Girls Club of Greater Manchester. So it's changed a few times in my 4 years as a club member. But going to the club, um, I got a lot out of it. It helped me get out of my shell, those kind of things. But I got way more out of it when I started working there and volunteering and being a volunteer, coach or whatever. And when you see how you're able to impact kids, it just brings a lot of joy, right? And you're not doing anything for them; they're the ones who are doing the work. But you're providing opportunities, you're providing an ear to listen to, um, somebody to give them some structure, those types of things. And so I went off to college and I started out in engineering. Back then, it was like the black screens with green. It looked like dot matrix
Yeah.
letters, and I couldn't. You couldn't. I had good eyesight back then, but you go through 7 pages of code and there's like a colon instead of a semicolon. And I'm like, I love problem solving. Editing is not my thing. So graduate on time. Math became the answer. They told me I could become a consultant. Didn't really even know what that meant, but I was like, graduate on time, check. And
That's important.
yeah, and I think I got a lot out of math from the idea of critical thinking skills. There's kind of always an answer in math. You just got to keep looking for it. And I think that's probably true in life as well. So you just have to keep plugging away at stuff. Um, but when I graduated, I said, all right, one more summer working at camp. And Manchester had this nice camp, and I worked at the camp, actually lived at the camp. And halfway through the summer, I said to my boss, how do I get to keep doing this? Both my parents had jobs they loved. My dad was a CFO of a meat packing company, and my mom taught in a variety of places. And I'm like, well, I know I'm going to work a lot because both of them were workaholics. And if I'm going to work a lot, I should do something I love, and I love doing this. So I decided to keep doing that, and worked kind of full time, part time for a couple of years. And
That was at the camp. You were working part time,
the
full time.
camp and the Boys and Girls Club.
Okay. Okay.
I say part time, full time. It was New Hampshire, live free or die. The rules were different back then. You're working 40 hours a week, but you're still part time.
Yeah.
And the and then a real full time gig opened up, and I ended up becoming the athletic director in Manchester, New Hampshire, and not Manchester. That's where I grew up. Nashua, New Hampshire, and um, did that for a little bit, and then realized that I could make even more impact if I had time where I wasn't kind of trapped in the gym. Because the gym, you can have huge impact because the gym's where kids want to be. So many of the boys and girls and the teens that went to the club wanted to be in the gym. So it gives you a ton of influence because you control playing time, you control access to the gym, and they have fun when they're around you because they're enjoying the sports, right?
Mhm.
But I realized that a lot of times I'd get kids when they were like juniors in high school, and it's hard to turn around a lot of years of not doing well in school, and to being able to have choices when you graduate. I don't care what choice you make, right? Like, as long as you're making a good choice. But I don't care if you're going to a trade school. I don't care if you're going to be an apprentice or if you're going to go to college or whatever it is. But you want to have choices when you graduate, right? So I became the individual services director, kind of like a guidance counselor. Okay. And from there, I was able to help kids think about their future more and more time to kind of do some, I wouldn't say counseling because I'm certainly not a licensed counselor, but that type of thing. And then I got traded.
Got traded?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So we won an award to get for the best program in the country.
So this was the Boys and Girls Club in Manchester.
In Nashua.
Nashua, okay.
Yeah. And so we went to a conference to go down and accept the award. There was money that came along with it. So they, as a reward for us, they spent the money on bringing us down there. And we got in late, and I get a phone call first thing the next morning, and they're like, I got your next job. This is my boss talking. I got your next job. You'll be the program director in Waltham, but they changed the position for this, and you'll make this, and yada yada yada. Like he had already worked it out with his friend, and I'm like, what? And he goes, I don't want to go anywhere. And he goes, yeah, but you will soon, and you want to go to the right place. I'm like, okay. And you can't leave till August. This is like in May. So anyhow, that night,
So what are the feelings at that point? Like, as you get that phone call, what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking yesterday was a long travel day. I'm like, why are you calling me at 6:30 in the morning? And because he had gotten down earlier, and I was thinking I didn't kind of want to go, but I had a lot of respect for Ron Haydorn, who would be my boss in that situation, and so I just digested it. You know, it's a lot. Like all of a sudden your head's spinning because this was not on my radar screen. And anyhow, that night I had an interview in the hotel bar because there was no place else to be.
Sure.
And everybody else is out celebrating on Bourbon Street. And I ended up getting the job. And that actually was a great learning experience. That job in Waltham, I was a program director. It was the first time I was supervising people. And, it's a hard transition to go from being good at doing something to being good at supervising others to do that. And once I realized that if I treated the staff the same way I treated the youth, different boundaries and different, things, but like it's all adult learning principles. You just change them for the different age needs, right? And once I figured that out, I was okay. But the club was in transition, and there was a lot happening. And I ended up, somebody would leave, we wouldn't replace them, and that kind of stuff. So I ended up working like 80 hours a week and not making progress. Like you're constantly feeling like you're going backwards. I was doing facility stuff, which I have no business doing facility stuff. I made mustard gas, put myself in the hospital. Fun stuff like that. So,
do you think? So I'm curious with that. Was that a micromanagement situation? Was it just you didn't know the lessons at that point? What do you think caused it to where you picked up all those?
There was a few things. So the person who I went to work for, who is a great mentor to me in my career, he went on paternity leave almost as soon as I arrived with his fourth kid. And then he came back and he was there for a month or two. And then he became the executive director in Worcester. And they didn't replace him. And the executive director at the time, who had done a ton of great things there, but he had been out because of a death in the family. And when he came back, my mentor had taken on a lot of the work because he had been the interim. So it was kind of like he was doing a job and a half, and the executive director came back and was used to that being done. They didn't replace that position, so now I'm trying to do two 50-hour-a-week stuff. And this is right around 9/11, So like money was tough everywhere,
Hmm.
and that was part of it. That's part of why we didn't fill the positions and stuff. And at the same time, because the exec had been out for an extended leave, there was turnover on the board and those kind of things. So things that used to be automatic were no longer automatic, and it was a tough time of transition in the organization. I think was and then when money starts getting tight and there's transitions and when you have that middle person who kind of smooths everything out, like Juan Carlos is that role here that just kind of makes it all work. When that goes away, then there's more bumps in the road, and all of a sudden, when something that would have just been a bump, turns into a crater, and the maintenance person decides to leave, and then we replace it with a cleaning company. Now, that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem was I was in my late 20s, and I thought I was Superman and didn't need to ask for any help, and
As we all do.
so I would do things like, well, let me fix this. I never went to the exec and said, hey, I don't know how to do this. I knew we didn't have money, so let me try to figure it out rather than putting more on his plate because he's trying to raise money in an environment where the stock market is in the tank and everybody's doesn't have that money, right? And so that was a lot of learning there, of like learning to ask for help, learning how to supervise people, like the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, like I kind of got the idea of coaching people fairly quickly, but the processes of it. Um, the club in Nashua had an amazing culture. Like I said, we had the best program in the country, but the supervisory system was built on the culture more than it was on processes, and so learning how to kind of do some of those things. But like I
So, like
said,
making a system around the actual club so that it would function smoother.
not so much the club itself, but things like that needed to happen too. But things like staff reviews and evaluation and the training process and all these things, and um, and a lot of that existed, but a lot of it went with the person who left, you know, and
And they were there only a couple months with you being
with
there.
me, yeah. So they'd been there for 15 years or whatever, but so it was just a lot of learning, and eventually I hit a point where I was like, all right, I am working a gazillion hours a week. I am not making the difference that I'd like to make. I was making a difference. I mean, I definitely, you know, when I eventually did leave, there was definitely some people who were like, "What can we, how do we keep you or whatever?" But it was not sustainable, and I ended up calling the guy who left actually because we had talked forever ago, and he had said, "Oh yeah, I'm hiring a director of operations, but." I had no plans of leaving. Like, you got to finish what you start. And I finally just hit a point where I couldn't keep, like, the other option was I was giving him my keys and I was going to work at UPS and loading trucks. So I ended up calling him and said, "Hey, you hire that director of operations?" I can't hire you. Like, I can't do that to that club. And I said, "Well, I'm leaving either way." He's like, "Okay." So we had lunch, and I had the job pretty quickly after that, and great opportunity there. Learned a ton from him. I had opportunities. I got to train people all across the country. Got to do a lot of fun stuff with the Keystone Club and those kind of things, which is a team leadership club. And then we built a new club. We did a extreme makeover of one of our clubs in the housing projects there, and really gave a lot of kids a lot of opportunity. And never wanted to leave there either. And I called my friend when this job opened up and said, "Hey, you should apply for this." And I was like talking him into it. I failed. And I called him right back. I said, "You're not applying for that, are you?" He goes, "No." I said, "Good. I talked myself into it."
I sold myself.
Yeah. Because I never wanted to be an exec. Like, I wanted to be closer to the action. But then I realized that this was a place where I could make a difference. And it had a lot of things I was looking for. Lowell is a New England mill town. I grew up in Manchester. Waltham's a mill town. Worcester is a mill town. Different. It's more of a factory town than with the river, but it's it has that kind of real or gritty feel that I
Yes.
like. Like I don't
Yes.
want to be in Anytown, USA with, a chain on every quarter, right? Like I want to know that I'm in a place that has some character to it, and and I knew there was a need. There was um, a need for to be able to do more for the kids here, and I also knew there was resources in Lowell, right? Like if you're going to come and try to run a nonprofit and you go someplace that doesn't have the resources, you can be as good as you want, but if there's no money to raise, it doesn't matter how good you are at doing it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I applied, and I was lucky enough to get the job 15 years ago, and I guess that's how I got here. That was a long-winded answer to your question.
I'm for it. As I said in the beginning, please give me, the full length story. Now, going back to the very beginning, when your boss first calls you up at 6:30 in the morning and you're just like rubbing your eyes trying to get through the
Yeah,
day before getting in late, do you understand what he was doing? At that point, it seemed like you were kind of like, well, I don't want to leave, but he's like, you're eventually going to want to. Have you experienced those moments with others where you're trying to set them up before they really know that you're trying to, like, how has that process paid off for you now when you look back at it?
I think that the Nashua Club always had a culture of there's a time to grow and there's a time to go. The exec when I started, his name was Dominic Giovanazzo, um, and that was part of his philosophy. And he really believed in developing people and giving them skills, and it made it better for the kids in his club. But it also meant, eventually that would help somebody because there's not. Sometimes in clubs it can be challenging because, all right, you've got a certain amount of managers, but then all of a sudden you get to um, the program director, the person that runs the club day to day. There's one of those, and then there's one person kind of above that in the operations world. There's finance and fundraising, but and then there's the executive director, right? So like you have 6 or 8 people at this level, then you go to one. People aren't going to stay with that, right? And the
Sure.
hours are also tough because when you're on the floor and you're a manager, you're working. Back then it was like 12 to 9. Here it's more like 12 to 8. But you know, a lot of people that lifestyle only works for a little while, and you get kids. I mean, sometimes it works out well because it means you can take the early shift and your partner can take the other. But um, that at the time that wasn't a consideration for me. But the yeah, I think that I've always tried to live that, and I wouldn't say that I've ever made a trade like that. That worked because Ron and Kurt were best friends, and I was close with both of them. So I don't know that that would have been a conversation he'd have with the average person in the
Sure.
way that it happened.
Sure.
It also meant there was a high level of trust, to accelerate the hiring process. But I am I regularly talk with staff about like what's your plan for the future and how can we help you prepare for that. Yes, you have to do today's job first, but like what are the experiences that you can get now that are going to put you in a position? And I think one of the things that I got starting in Manchester and then especially in Nashua and also in Worcester was the experience of being part of things. So like I would Shirley Pimentel, who's amazing as our youth development director here, she is chairing the upcoming all staff training that is 25 clubs that are part of that. So that's a leadership opportunity. She's already a leader, but like that will serve her well at the next level, right? So um, it's having experiences like that and being supported in those experiences. Because it'd be very easy for my boss to say, Joe, it's nice you want to help out and do that, but that doesn't really help our club that much. So why don't you focus on what you need to get done to run the gym or to
Sure. Yeah.
run whatever?
And you can't really be upset at that statement either because you're working here kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I've always believed that my experience was that I brought more back to the club by doing those things, and I became a better staff person by doing those things. And now I want to pay that forward, right? And I want our staff to feel that. And I also think sometimes that's the stuff that brings people joy because they get to stretch themselves, and it's a nice because it's a temporary stretch. Some of these things, and but I'd also be chair of like the program council for a year that organizes a lot of the leagues and stuff like that, or like I said, the Keystone Club, and being on the having one of our teens be on the planning committee for that, which means you are too. um, and just a lot of things. Being a national training associate, and they gave me time to do that because they knew that if I was well trained enough to train everybody else around the country, I could train our staff too. And every time I'd go to one of those trainings, yes, I'm in front of the room, but I'm trying to get them to talk as much as I am, and I get a lot of ideas when I do that, right? So, absolutely, I think that is. I mean, it's a perfect extension of what we do with the kids and the teens. So we're constantly trying to help them develop. Well, why shouldn't we do the same thing with our staff? It's all about continuous improvement, helping people coach people to grow, and the more they grow, the more they're going to help our kids and help our teens and to help us achieve our goal of ending generational poverty.
Right. Now, when you go through that trade, it ends up being something where you end up mustard gas in the hospital. I'm sure if you had YouTube, that'd be a little different, but
Yeah, I was taught how to the maintenance guy before he left, because he didn't hate the club. There was just a situation where, he needed to go, and but he wanted to make sure I knew how to take care of the pool. And I should have known there was a problem when there was a World War One mustard gas mask. I mean, World War One gas mask is part of the process. It tells you I'm old. That stuff's not allowed anymore.
Yeah.
But probably wasn't allowed back then either. But and I just did it out of order, and because it was a while before I got to it because I was overwhelmed, and I went to the hospital. It was more like they gave me oxygen, but it did damage my. I've had a throat scan. I forget what they call it when they put the light down there. But and they're like, "Oh, how long have you been smoking?" And I'm like, "I've had 2 cigars in my life."
Yeah.
So
It's had some lasting effects. Yes.
nothing too bad.
Right.
But yeah. So you're just kind of taking each day as it comes. And like I said, both my parents were workers, so working didn't intimidate me. But I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. If I had been the program director, I would have been good. But when I was the program director without a director of operations, which means that bleeds into my work,
Right.
I wasn't ready to do both those jobs. And
You're trying to come through.
I was told you weren't going to be able to 2:30. Sorry.
I think John took my message.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
Sorry for the interruption. That's what happens when you take over program space.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I understand. This is not my first time that something like that has happened. So I just saw him hovering at the door, and I'm like, I can't tell if he needs your attention or if he's just trying to get into the room. So I was like,
Well,
just do what you need. Yeah.
He needed his coffee and he needed the computer. So
Yeah, understandable.
you need those two things to get going.
One to power you through, one to get the work done. I get
Exactly.
it. So you end up at that club. You work there basically to the point where you've exhausted yourself mentally and physically.
Yeah.
You end up calling the guy who needs a director of operations. At first, he's like, I'm not taking you. And you're like, well, I'm leaving anyway. He says, all right, let's talk then. You end up there. You find yourself you've learned these lessons at the previous club. Now you're bringing it there to where you can execute it and have resources that help you continue to grow on that.
Yeah.
And then slowly you work yourself into the executive director position that you tried to sell your friend on, but then you end up being there.
Yeah.
And now you're here. You've been here 15 plus years. What drives you to continue to do this? And then what is the goal for you, right? Is because you're saying, hey, I'm here. I love it, but there's got to be something that makes you, not, and I get but Boys and Girls, they're really trying to work on making resources available for people who might not have them. So how does that tie into what wakes you up in the morning?
Yeah. So I think that throughout my career, aside from that learning experience in Waltham, I've always felt like I've had the best job in the world. So when I was working at camp, like summer camp's just an awesome place to work at. And you have responsibility, but it's not like when you're done, you're done. The end of the day's over, the kids go home. And I wasn't high enough that I had like paperwork.
Yeah, take home work.
And then I got to be the gym director. I mean, like the athletic director is the most popular guy in the club. That I don't know. Now that you have music, that can intercept
You'll
that.
compete a little bit. I get
and,
it.
You know, so, but you also get to see the transformation that happens in kids' lives, and doing that, and then being the individual services director, where I got to get a little deeper. In those two jobs in Nashua, I knew the kids' parents, grandparents, would drop them off a lot in the van, on the way home. None of them had, transportation, so I just kind of like go around and drop them off. That's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night or whatever, but that's also where the best conversations happen, where you get to understand what's really going on for them. Like one of the powerful conversations I had was one night, and this young man who had gotten some scholarship money and for college because he had been a youth of the year, and so he had earned, I think it was like 25 grand or something towards college, and I thought he was like at the which college point of view, and he goes, I don't know if I can do it. Now he's somebody who first generation. He learned, his parents hadn't gone to college, probably hadn't, that new to the country. He was Dominican, and he learned how to speak English watching TV, when he was like 12. And I can't even imagine, sometimes people talk to somebody about their language, and I'm like, they speak English way better than I can speak Spanish or take your pick of the language, and I can't imagine if you dump me in the Dominican and trying to
figure it out from TV.
Exactly. And so anyhow, we ended up talking about it, and walked him through the process. He had already applied to schools. I'd help him with that, but just helping him understand the things that you don't think about if you've, like for me, college was 13th grade. It just was what it was. And but thinking about like, oh, there's expenses like you need sheets for the bed that's not the same size as the bed at home.
Yeah, so the price, you got to buy the bed sheets, you got to buy all these.
Yeah, but just
things.
making sure those things are, what happens when you get this $50 fee between graduation and the end of the summer, all of a sudden, like, okay, well, when you don't have a lot of money to begin with, that could break you, right? And so seeing that, and so he ended up going to school, and after his freshman year, I was at the club in Waltham by that point. He goes, hey, I want to do a conference together. So he's like either a freshman or a sophomore in college, and he puts together this conference on like Los Amigos conference, he called it, of how to help kids that would be first generation figure out how to navigate the process so they didn't feel like he felt. And
right, yeah.
So many of our kids here are first generation college or will be first generation college students, and knowing that they belong on campus is huge. We try to get UMass Lowell and Middlesex Community College here as often as possible, so that our members can see this as like, oh, these are humans just like me. They're not like better than me or anything like that. And then we also get them on campus. We had a couple go on a tour recently who are both going to there next year, and one of them was very concerned if he belonged because, just he has an IEP and different things. And he goes, and they're practicing doing elevator speeches. Well, this kid has talked to the lieutenant governor, talked to Lori Trahan, congresswoman, has talked to the city manager, has talked to the and walked up and talked to them and like made connections where he got a job. He knows how to do an elevator speech better than all these college students. So he saw that and he's like, oh, okay, maybe I do belong, right? And he had the grades to back it up. It's not like he's not a smart kid, So
It's the
But
fear of the unknown. That's how that is.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And when you're a first generation, it is that unknown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you throw in the fact that for some of them, the parents have less understanding of the process as well, especially if they're coming from another country or those kind of things. Lowell's a city of immigrants, and processes are just different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
You find that the kids are the ones translating to the parents nowadays when it comes to certain things like paperwork. I've
all kinds of stuff,
yeah.
all kinds of stuff. The young man I was talking about before about college, he was in an interesting position because he was the oldest of three boys, and they didn't have any other family at one point. They didn't have any other family in the city, and she needed translation at a doctor's appointment. Can you imagine being like 12, 13 years old and translating for your mom in a doctor's appointment?
Right. Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's intimidating. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially because I'm pretty sure most medical terms are not ones that are easy to translate.
Right, right. It's not what you're learning on TV on a day to day. Absolutely.
No. So, luckily today there's more supports for that, and Lowell has some good things there, but there's still plenty more work to be done, especially because in Lowell the amount of languages that people speak, we have people who speak I think it's 6 or 7 different languages, but we need like 20.
Yeah.
And the kids, like you said, most of the kids are pretty good. Although sometimes we'll get a new kid, but they catch on fairly quick. And
I didn't speak English when I came here, so I completely understand that. Yeah.
where were you coming from?
Greece.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I took ESL classes in the morning before I went to school, and then I got sent back 2 grades because I didn't speak English. The only thing I knew was math. So I get that process completely.
It always blows me away too when people are like, "Oh, why doesn't this person get a better job?" Well, they have They could be a doctor in Greece, but here it doesn't translate over, so they have to clean bathrooms or whatever it is. Like because they need a job to feed their family. But where they were, there might have been a war. I'm not saying Greece had a war recently, but
Sure.
different countries have that, and they had no choice but to leave. And it means your blessings every day, because that was never something I've had to worry about. But you asked me what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's seeing what becomes possible when you see our young people, and we talked about talking to some of these powerful people, and we had a young man last year, and he, in the first meeting we had, so we went down to D.C. There was a handful of our teens that went with Jenna and Shirley, our 2 of our staff, and I met them down there the day we were going to the Hill, because I've been there a couple times and I could kind of introduce them. And in the first meeting, this one, we always kind of knew who was going to say what to a certain extent. Like, they chose what to say, but who was going to speak when. And he kind of missed his cue, and he's like, so as we're walking to the next meeting, I was kind of like, how did that go for you? He goes, well, every time I wanted to speak, there'd be a little pause, and then by the time I would think I had permission to speak, it was too late. Somebody else had jumped in. So we kind of talked about it and worked through it, and then in the next one, he actually spoke up, and then he actually spoke up a second time when it wasn't on the script, but he had something to say. And then the third meeting, he led the meeting off, and this meeting's a much bigger meeting with like a handful of other clubs that were doing the same thing. And he led off the meeting, and then 4 times he chimed back in, like he gave a half second for everybody else, and they're not doing it. I got something to say, And one of the things he said in that meeting was, I never thought I'd be in this room where somebody in a senator's office in Washington, D.C. would be listening to me. And it's things like that, and that's, obviously a bigger thing at D.C., but it's the same kind of stuff happens here every day of helping teens understand, and young people understand that how powerful they are and what control they do have over their own lives. And to me, it's about making sure that every kid has the same access to resources. They have to do the work. They have to, be uncomfortable, right? To learn new things, right? The only way any of us learn new things is you have to be willing to fail. There is not a person in any Hall of Fame who did not fail a gazillion times in order
Absolutely,
to
yes,
get there,
yes.
right? And and then they have to have the awkward conversation when it's not necessarily an awkward conversation, but they're afraid it's going to be an awkward conversation, right?
We play it up in our minds of how serious and how bad we're going to
Absolutely.
mess it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
somebody came to my office the other day, and they were afraid it was going to be like, and I was just like, oh, okay, just document it, and we're fine. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
look, if you didn't tell me, then we'd have a problem.
Right. Yeah. Right.
That's about the worst thing you can do is like hold back.
Yes.
So when you get to see people have that epiphany moment, it's just it's you can't beat the feeling, and it's I don't get to do that as much anymore because my job is to be the face of the club and be out in the community and raise money and provide leadership and strategy with the board and all that kind of stuff. And I always thought I'd never want to do that. That I want to be closer to the kids.
Well, that was the initial launch of everything that you did, right?
Yeah, and what I realized is I love talking about our kids. I love talking about our teens. I love talking about our staff and the amazing work that they do. I mean, I've always loved talking about the club, so that's really what my job is. And the other half of my job is to listen, and I'm good at that too. So, you know, I still get to do that, and I still, come over to make sure I get my fix of working with the young people whenever I can.
You got to stay on the pulse, right? You got to be able to.
Yeah, you got to listen, and because when we designed this building, the building that's being built, the people who had the most input in what it's going to look like is our teens. The architect came and listened to our young people, our younger kids, the teens, listen to parents. The parents were like, look, you all figure out what just make sure it's safe. That's the only thing the parents cared
That's the
about.
main concern of every parent. Yeah.
Listen to the board too, but like the board had the least input. We had things absolutely like in terms of we went to other clubs and made sure like safety and how the building flows and that kind of stuff. But the teens and the younger people talked a lot about what they wanted for programming, what things were important to them. They wanted it to be, they wanted the building to look like a workplace of the future. They had been to UKG, Kronos back then, and they had seen like how cool an office could be. Like we want it to look like Google, and we don't have Google's budget, but we do have Patrick Ty, who was a club kid, and he's donating his services. He's also one of the top 50 architects in the country. So when you see this building, he listened to them, and no, they did not get the zip line across to Western F Studios or the slide into the canal. Those things didn't quite make it. But we do have outdoor space for the teen center. There's a beautiful terrace off the back. I didn't get it till I saw it. So like he said, we're going to do this. And I was like, okay, we listen to the teens. We need to do that. And then you get out there and it's like, this is the back deck everybody dreams about off their house. This is awesome. So I think part of it is listening to our teens and listening to the expert, because I know I am not an architect, and I think for Juan Carlos and I, we know program spaces, but we also listen to our program staff around that, right? Like I haven't run a gym in a long time, so let's listen to the current gym staff about what the current needs are, not what the needs were, 30 years ago when I was athletic director.
Sure.
And so everything we do, we try to do it through the pulse of what our teens, what our families, what our young people are saying the needs are.
Right. So for yourself, the main reason you still get up every day is because you have that. I relate it. So I don't have the same type of job, work style that you have in terms of like, I don't work with kids and in terms of that aspect, but I understand the euphoric feeling that comes with creating a moment that brought someone out of their shell and gave them the ability to now say, oh, I learned something today. I can apply this multiple times over. So Now, as you're, obviously you'll come back into the picture as often as you can to make sure you're always kind of aware of what the kids needs, hence why you were able to get the the architecture to kind of fit what they were looking for, even though the budget might not be Google. It's
Patrick's
still,
done a pretty darn good job of making it look pretty
yeah,
special.
it looks amazing. From so the as I was walking in, I saw the exterior on the side here, the
Yeah.
extension. I was like, wow, like that is when you look at what you're building and what the vision is, you really can see it come
Yeah.
together, you know? So, as we're getting close to wrapping up here, I have two questions that I know I definitely want to ask, and then we'll kind of go off of what you say from there. But two of my favorite questions to ask is if future self of you came back in this moment right now and was going to give you advice for problems you're going through right now, what advice would future you give you right now?
Use AI.
Yes.
I think that it would be to let others help wherever you can. I think that there are so many people in this world that want to help, and too often I'm way better about it than I used to be. I actually try to do it all the time. Like I said, we try to let the teens lead, we try to let our staff lead. When we go to DC, I sit back on the couch, they're all at the table. But I think in general, whether it's our donors, our volunteers, all those types of folks, you got to let other people help because you can't do it all. Nobody can do anything by themselves. You mentioned earlier I got an award last a week or two ago. The reality is, so many people should have gotten that award because nobody does things on their own. It's a group effort. There's volunteers, there's staff, the work our teens do and our young people do, all come together to do that. So, but even though I think I'm pretty good at doing that, I still think that that's one of the most important things of do more of that.
Right. Right. So not micromanaging every chance you can. It's more giving the opportunity for them to grow into the position of handling the tasks that come across that.
Well, yes, but also when I say let others help, I mean like trying to think of how to. So let's say there's an opportunity. Let's put somebody in front of the room who's not always in front of the room. Let's put, um, like there's a lot of times that I put Juan Carlos. There was a stretch where when he first became the deputy executive director, and I would send him to a meeting. They're like, "Well, what's he doing here?" I was like, well, "He's doing the job of executive director that I did 15 years ago when I first got here. The club is much bigger now, and it's different, but." He could do my job. He could be an executive director, at a place much bigger than this, and not feeling like, oh well, because it's my title or it's how it's always been done that I have to be the one doing that. Let's let Juan Carlos do that because then it frees me up to do so many other things, and it also is he typically has already done most things he I ask him to do because he's pretty awesome,
Yeah.
But it's the same thing with volunteers, right? Like sometimes I feel like, oh, I should do this. But so and so could also do this. And a lot of times our board members want to help and they want to do more, and they're not sure what it is to do. So helping them to figure out how they want to help, I think that's kind of where I'm going. And even with staff of like, sometimes people need permission to lead, and they need permission. Like, now, the people who are waiting for them to lead are like, what are you waiting for? We thought we gave you permission, right?
Right.
But I think it's trying to find more ways to empower people to lead, beyond the idea of micromanaging, but just looking at the roles and seeing where people can do things that, I guess part of it is if there's something that I'm doing that I'm really comfortable doing, I probably should be finding somebody else to do that and finding things I'm uncomfortable to do in order for me to continue to grow. But it means somebody else should be learning that so that, and I plan on being here another 10 years if the board wants to keep me. And, but if if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody needs to have the experience doing things that I'm doing, but that goes throughout the organization, right? Like that's not just me and Juan Carlos. That's or whatever position you want to take. It's kind of throughout the organization who could be doing that, and a lot of times they're going to do it better than I would. I stopped doing the training nationally because I was too far removed from doing it every day with the teens, and I realized I can't name every pop star anymore, and it means I'm out of touch. I mean, I'm not. I still, like I said, get in here, but I don't. When I worked with teens daily, I knew what was cool and what wasn't cool.
Sure,
I knew all the slang. I knew all that stuff. Now I know some of it.
Yeah. Right.
But there's a lot I don't know because, the slang that donors and board members and politicians use is very different than what the 15-year-olds use.
Yes. Understandable. All right, my last question, and it might just completely go back to what you just talked about now, but through all these years, you've learned a bunch of lessons. You've learned a bunch of lessons. Now, if you could only take one lesson with you, and you had to rewind time to the very beginning, that camp day where you're making a decision to do all this, what would be that one lesson? Because you would forget everything else. You'd only have that one lesson to start all this journey all over again. What would that one lesson be for you?
I'll go with my favorite quote, Maya Angelou. People will forget what you did, they will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Everything we do comes back to relationships. And I think that even if you're doing the right thing, if you make somebody feel horrible while you're doing it, it's not effective, right? There's times that I have had to discipline young people, discipline staff, and but I don't want to be Judge Smalls from Caddyshack here and be like, I'm doing it for your own good. But because you're doing it out of what's best for them, and you talk to them about it in terms of, all right, well, I want to make sure that you understand that being on time matters because you're going to have a career, and if you get a job, you're going to lose that job if you don't respect being on time, and that's why you're not going to start today on the basketball team, right? That hurts, and I'm not saying they're happy with me in that moment.
No, they're never happy in that moment.
But when you come back with them, later, and sometimes it's 10, 20 years later, they're like, you were fair to me, and I knew in the moment that you were doing it for my sake, not on a power trip. And I think that was, but it also is those euphoria moments, right? Like, they're going to remember who was in the room when that happened, and those things build the relationships that then lead to future breakthroughs, right? And they teach me stuff way more than I teach them.
I would assume that's part of what makes you a good listener, is the fact that you'll listen to them and let them educate you on a situation, but at the same time, when it's time to explain to them, hey, this is why I have to talk to you today. Do you understand why and what the reasoning I'm doing is what?
Yeah.
It's not the nicest thing or the happiest thing in the moment, but in the long run, you're creating characteristics which are going to benefit them.
Yeah, and I think that's, I also think that they knew that I had a short memory. Like I had a long memory in terms of caring about them, but, all right, they got in trouble. When they came back, I'd be like, all right, I need to see your club card. Or here's your club card back. So I'd take the club card, so they had to see me when they came back. And I'd be like, hey, I really missed you. I'm sorry you made the decision to not be here. I didn't make the decision. You made the decision because of your behavior, right? But the purpose of that was, hey, I care about you. I'm glad you're back. And they knew that I was done. You had your consequence. I still believe in you. I still,
There's no resentment, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And again, it's how you make people feel. Right. And yes, our vision is to end generational poverty, but the methods are through giving structure and helping people to feel like they have the hope and opportunity to do that. That's step one, and there's a lot of processes you got to put around that. But that's why I get up in the morning.
Nice. So as we wrap up here, what is the best way for people to contact you or contact the Boys and Girls Club or social media that they can follow you at? Whatever it is that you'd like to share for people to be able to reach out to you, what would that be?
So the website's lbgc.org. Always where you can get the most information. Everybody's contact information is up there, whether it's looking for me or you're looking to volunteer at the club or do something like that. Justine Martin is great, but or you're looking to work here in the future or send your kid here. All that information's on the website, and it's only $40 a year. If you're a teenager, it's $5.
Wow,
So
that's cheap. That is
we want to have a
cheap.
low barrier to entry so that nobody's going to walk on by and say, I can't afford that.
Sure.
And thankfully, we have a generous community that helps us to, it costs $4.3 million. The $40 and the $5 doesn't even get us to $100,000. So
Sure, yeah. Understand. Yeah, I get that.
But and then we're on social. I don't know the social handles, but if you go on Facebook,
I'll
you
add them
Google-
on here. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
And but yeah, that's the best way of getting me, or stop by and check out what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, come check out the back patio and the new construction that's going on for sure.
The teen
But-
center will be opened up this coming school year. So,
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I came here with Juan Carlos, they were still doing all the construction stuff. So I'm sure you guys are excited to finally be able to
Getting close.
get it going.
Yeah, it's
Nice.
exciting.
Nice. Joe,
Hey,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you
I
for the time,
appreciate your
Lawrence.
time, man. But people, I will go ahead and put Joe's information for the Boys and Girls Club all over the video as usual. Other than that, we will talk to you all later. Peace.